Thank you very much, Gladys, for that nice introduction. And once again, thank you to the Open University for the invitation. A few of you, or at least a couple of you, were at my talk on Tuesday. There's a theme running between these two talks. On Tuesday, I talked about assessment literacy from the point of view of all the stakeholders that could be expected to be assessment literate. But in this particular talk, I'm focusing on teachers and the needs for assessment literacy among teachers and the opportunities and barriers to their assessment literacy. I should say that although I did work in Hong Kong for 7 years, 2003 is now a really long time ago. And a lot of things change anywhere in the world, but often things change twice as quickly in Hong Kong as they do anywhere else. And also, although I did several research projects in Hong Kong that concerned schools, many of you will say that it really isn't very easy for outsiders to get inside classrooms in Hong Kong. So when we did studies with schools, it was only very occasionally and sparsely that we were able to get entry, or what researchers call entree, into the classrooms. So that everything I say you need to take with a pinch of salt, because sometimes I'm treading on the verges of my credibility or my authority to talk about certain things. And so I won't mind if you call me to task during the question time. So I'll begin by thinking about how assessments can support learning. And this expression, assessment supporting learning, is a very deliberate one and is the theme that will run all the way through and is very, very tightly connected with assessment literacy and what assessment literacy is. So I assert that it's only by putting the bulk of assessment activities in the hands of teachers so that what is assessed is what learners can do and have actually done, that assessments will support learning. However, putting the bulk of assessment activities into the hands of teachers demands considerable trust in the teachers. And considerable trust in the teachers demands that the teachers actually do have the knowledge and the skills to handle the trust put in them and do well. So it's a kind of a responsibility chain. In this presentation, I center my discussion around this issue, the assessment responsibilities placed on teachers, and I ask whether they do in fact have the knowledge and skills, and if not, why not, what can be done, and by whom. And there's an implicit question. If there's some fault in the fact that sometimes teachers don't have the necessary assessment literacy, whose fault is it? If there is a fault, whose is it? I see this whole area as a conflict. It certainly is a conflict in Hong Kong, but it's a conflict pretty much everywhere in the world, except in those few highly liberated, advanced countries where they don't have large, powerful, formal examination-type assessments. So in many countries, including Hong Kong, teachers live a conflicted existence. Trust is put in them, demands are made of them, and yet not enough trust is placed in them, and not enough tools are provided to them. Furthermore, very often they're not authorised to make assessment decisions in their own ways. They're only authorised to make decisions on what someone else says, or when someone else says they can, and in the ways that they are told that they must. And just to make things worse, there's two kinds of assessment, actually many kinds of assessment, but there are two dramatic dichotomies in assessment. And this is, those of you who know David Carless and are familiar with his book, which is, I've forgotten the name of, something to do with productive assessment, 2015. He talks about teacher management assessment being a double duty. So one of the duties is the assessment that you do in the classroom as a teacherly task, but the other is being aware of what's going on with the demands of the large-scale testing that your students are going to have to take. So, and what I see now is, for some reason, all of the transitions in my slides have gone. So there's no transition. You weren't supposed to see everything all at the same time, and I have no idea why that has happened. And I'm not going to stop and try to sort it out. Which means there won't be any of the sort of sense of drama that you get when you don't know what the person is going to say next. This is a shame. Don't understand it. So teachers should be at the heart of assessment. Many of you will say, well, yes, obviously. That's, we know that. It's obvious, isn't it? But in fact, you will also, if you think about it for a very long time, realise that often teachers are not at the heart of assessment. They're very much on the fringes. And if they're on the fringes, they are more like the janitorial staff than anything else. They're cleaning up the mess of people not being at the same levels as each other, or they're in the wrong subject, or they're not grouped together in a convenient way, and they're not ready for the next thing that other people think they should be doing. So we're trying to come up with assessments that will neatly package them up, like being the person who sweeps the floors and gets it all up and then puts it in the bucket. Not so attractive sounding from that point of view. So assessments do all kinds of things, but what they mostly don't do is support learning. Many years ago, a colleague and I did a research study of the influence of the TOEFL test, the test of English as a foreign language, which in the United States and many countries is the dramatic test that second language learners to get into university. Like in Britain, it's the IELTS, and many of you probably took the IELTS and may have gone to university in the UK. We did a research study into what that causes in classrooms, and we found very frequently, we actually could get into classrooms because this was the US, we found that maybe one of every 4 lessons was completely given over to basically taking a mock test. And then half of the lesson after that was taken over to calling out all the right answers, and then hands up those who got it right. I mean, just hands up. So you want to look good, you just put your hand up all the time. And when we talked to the teachers afterwards, the teachers hadn't even noticed. They were quite surprised to be told, well, actually, about a third of every bit of the time that you spend in the classroom, you're not teaching. I said, what do you mean we're not teaching? I said, well, students are sitting there writing answers on a paper. Then in the next lesson, you're standing there calling out, well, do you think it's A, B, or C? A, no, wrong. B, oh, yes, well done. Is this teaching? Why is that? Well, there are lots of reasons, and a lot of them are political, and some of them are to do with assessment literacy. And sorting out quite the weight of those influences is not easy. But a key reason is lack of assessment literacy training for teachers, and also a discouragement of political awareness about what education does to a culture. That's really almost never taught as part of a teaching curriculum. And many teachers know too little about how assessments work at all, and even about what assessment options exist in their own teaching context. One of the really interesting things that came out of the TOEFL study was that when we interviewed teachers one by one, they basically were saying, but the students expect us to help them get ready to pass the TOEFL. They demand that we spend a lot of our time, doing practice tests and drilling them on particular grammar points that are on the test. But when we spoke to the students, they said, we wish the teacher wouldn't spend all this time, doing mock tests. And we said, well, but don't you want to pass the TOEFL? They said, well, yes, but we could pass the TOEFL without having to do all these mock tests. So then we asked them, what should your teachers be doing? And they came up with the most amazing teaching ideas. Actually, what we should have done was written a paper with all of the non-test prep ideas that the students came up with. There are probably 7 or 8 really great teaching activities that we had never seen any teacher do, not just in this context, but elsewhere as well. Which is really sad, because it's like, don't people ever talk to each other? The teachers honestly, I think honestly, thought they were doing what the students wanted, and the students were saying, I want the opposite. So many teachers don't know enough about how assessment works, and they don't know or maybe think enough about what their options are for assessment. If somebody hasn't given them this option, they don't think it up for themselves, apparently. And many fully trained teachers have nevertheless had little or no training in how assessments work and what effects they have. That is, they're not assessment literate. In contrast, let's think about what teachers know. I'm going to take my scarf off because it's annoying me. I'll go where I feel comfortable, thank you. I came for my audience. Okay, so pre-service teachers in most places get a fairly decent teacher education program. And usually they're prepared to teach from the perspective that teaching is an expertise. It's a skill area, and that it can be acquired or learned. So teachers learn theory subjects to support the pedagogies that they will be using later. Suddenly I have transitions, such as psychology and child development. They study philosophies and values underpinning teaching methods. They study a developmental sequence of courses designed to build their skills with practice in their pedagogic area. They also have opportunities to develop practical teaching skills by peer teaching, micro-teaching, attachments in schools, senior teacher mentoring in a practicum program, and so on. And I'm just going to click this thing to make it go away. Or try to. Yeah. And they get feedback on all of these activities over a whole cycle of intellectual growth and subject matter knowledge. Almost nothing like this happens when it comes to assessment. Almost nothing. And you can think about how many classes you had in assessment and how long they lasted and how much expertise was shared with you of what kinds. Surveys have shown that in many pre-service programs around the world, there's only one course on assessment in an entire teacher training program. And usually that course isn't actually linked in to any of the other courses. So it's not linked in even with a practicum, for example, which would be very, very obvious. It doesn't happen. Surveys also show that around the world, the bulk of the subject content in an assessment course, if you get an assessment course, has got to do with what the local tests are and how to do them and, you know, when to do them, etc. Often looking actually at sample materials of those local tests or on big tests. When Kathy Bailey and somebody else, J.D. Brown, I think, did a survey, they found that almost all the assessment courses in the US were telling people everything they would need to know to help somebody pass the TOEFL, and nothing they would need to know to help that teacher be able to help the learner assess their own learning. Okay, here is an empty slide. What time is it? Roger, how can I make the video turn on? Can I make the video turn on?
Do you need the YouTube?
It's not the end of the world if we can't do it. Do you have to get to that thing?
What?
Isn't that where it is?
I don't know why it disappeared.
Can't you find the desktop? I thought we were doing quite well. Okay. What is the difference between selecting performance and assessment? Is that no? Yes. No. No. Oh, troublemaker we've got. It only takes a second to check them out. Yes.
Almost actually getting a mark on it.
Getting them up or not? Okay, well that's one thing. This looks like the right thing. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. These days, we don't want to be, we don't want to turn around and see a man running at us with a large object. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world these days. Okay, I'm now going to show you something apparently completely irrelevant, which is a speaking test from one of the Cambridge exams. Cambridge are the people who do the IELTS test, but they also do a whole set of basic English proficiency tests. And Cambridge First is the one that sort of lines up with IELTS, but it's not anything to do with academic. And this is taken from the speaking component. Again, it's related to a project which I did with a colleague at CRELLA at Bedfordshire. I'm only going to show you a minute or two and then ask you something about it, and that's if I can make it work. Oh, it's going by itself. We don't want that.
Good afternoon. My name is Jenny Cook, and this is my colleague Jenny Tennant. And your name, sir?
My name is Florine.
And my name is Maria.
Can I have your mark sheets, please?
Yes, of course.
Here you go.
Thank you. Where are you from, Florine?
I'm from Holland, from the Netherlands.
And you, Maria?
I'm from Argentina.
Well, first we'd like to know something about you. Florine, tell us about a film you really like.
I really like the movie Titanic. I actually have seen it last night. And I like it because it's the story actually happened. And I like the love relationship between the two main characters.
Maria, are you going to do anything special this weekend?
Yes, this weekend I'm going with my best friends to the cinema to see a comedy film.
And Florine,
Okay, that's quite enough of that. I want to see if I can get you to tell me 3 or 4 good formative things that you saw in that video.
They were being asked in a fairly chatty way something they might be asked in real life, so they could potentially learn from that.
There's some semblance of authenticity there. What else? Gentlemen, you said there's no difference.
I thought you'd ask me.
You asked me to ask you.
And said there was no formative assessment.
Does that mean there's no summative assessment then?
Don't know.
There's no
We need to see the rest of the video. But it sounds to me like a very summative experience going on.
Yes. Okay. I'll accept that point. Now can I have 3 or 4 summative behaviours or reactions, performances that you noticed? Should be much easier. Teachers, come. Things you wouldn't do in your own class. Yeah. Yes, certainly she gave no feedback to Florine on what she said before turning to the other person. You are probably right. In fact, because I know you are. I saw the whole video. Anything else? Specific things, very specific things. Yeah, okay. Nobody else?
The other examiner is going to give marks of their performance.
Yeah.
I was saying there are different levels according to the Bloom's taxonomy. Some are more direct, and which film do you like? But some questions are more open. What are you going to do on the weekend? So maybe in that kind of level, you assess the candidates differently.
I think that's slightly technical. Whether those 2 questions were one open, one closed, I think the designers would say they would both need to be open. Which film and what to do this weekend. But you do have a point. Well, let me go back to the beginning. I'm going to see if I can sort of do a voiceover, and I might need that. What happened to that microphone? Just be sure I'm loud. Never done it this way before. Whoopsie.
good afternoon. My name is Jenny Cook, and this is my colleague Jenny Tennant. And your
Okay,
name,
so
sir?
colleague
My name is
Jenny,
Florine.
on. Can you hear?
And my name is Maria.
Can I have your mark sheets, please?
Florine?
Of course.
Here you go.
Thank you. Where are you from, Florine?
I'm from Holland, from the Netherlands.
Still
And
no
you,
eye
Maria?
I'm
contact.
from Argentina.
Look
Well,
at
first
the
we'd
girl's
like to know
eyes.
something about you.
Nervous.
Florine, tell us about a film you really like.
Okay,
really
now
like
here
the
I do
movie
need to
Titanic.
stop.
I actually have seen it last night, and I like it
Two
because
things. Firstly, it seems clear to me that Florine saw that movie last night for the maybe 27th time or the 3rd time. She saw it last night because she was going to do the test today. I happened to see it last night. She knew that they were going to ask her that. Well, she probably knew there's only a few possibilities, and maybe she'd done others. Maybe she'd gone on a picnic so that she could talk about going on a picnic in case that came up. But it did seem rather interesting that she happened to see it last night. Yeah. But also, a very subtle thing in terms of the, well, actually, to me, it's no longer subtle, but maybe you won't have noticed it, in terms of the examiner's behaviour, specifically eye contact. She was looking at her workbook. Now, I've watched dozens of these, and this woman is in several dozens of the ones that you can see on, you can see lots of them on YouTube if you're interested. I don't know how many times she's done this over the years. You'd think she would know this all by heart, but each time she says, now I'm going to ask you a question. What film did you see, Florine? So the two students don't really know who's going to get a turn until right there, which is a bit nerve-wracking. I mean, if I was doing it in ordinary conversation, I'd be looking at, I mean, even here in a not ordinary conversation, I'm also looking at people. And since she knows the paperwork by heart, I don't understand why. But the others do it, some not as badly as this lady, but they all seem to do it, a lot of down here and then. And it's just like a test. You know, I'm going to throw you a ball and none of you know which one, but I'm throwing it to you. And I just feel so sorry for little Maria. I'm going to stop there because we don't have a lot of time. But why do you think I'm showing it to you? Let's see what you mean.
Professor, is it you want to tell us, like, I found it very formative as the whole rundown is similar to those what they did in IELTS. So you're sort of different layer of questions to get into the deep conversation and discussion. So maybe you want to show us like there are lots of disadvantages about it when we're having this.
Well, I think you are saying that because it's like IELTS, that is an advantage. Are you?
Yeah.
You could take the FCE as preparation for IELTS. I suppose there is a point of view in which that is formative, but it happens not to be a point of view that I have. Because you wouldn't do these behaviours unless you were in a test. You don't do them with each other, you know, during the coffee break, do you? I mean, you could sit down next to your friend and say, are you going to the movies tomorrow? What are you going to see? But you would do it differently, wouldn't you? You'd have body language, you'd have eye contact, you'd probably have smiles. There'd be a lot of things that were different. So my contention and lots of people's contention is that, and now I need to switch back to the other thing, please, Roger, is that while this is much better than things that were going on 30 years ago, it still is not real life. And that wouldn't matter if it wasn't the case that it seeps into what should be classroom teaching and learning. Now you see, if I was a classroom teacher, and maybe teachers do this, and I knew about this resource on YouTube, I could be showing it to a class of Cambridge first test prep students, and I could be doing what I started to do here for a second, just deconstructing it and pointing out, you know, what's a bit examiners' behaviour and making them feel, well, it's just weird behaviour by examiners. It's okay if I behave normally. Point out that this one student is clearly in agonies of fear, and you should try to train yourself to have a bit sort of more relaxed posture, perhaps hide your hands under the table instead of revealing all this tension. And also, the one student who did not make eye contact, actually later on she does. She's clearly sufficiently capable that she doesn't need to be very anxious. But she didn't give a good preliminary impression. Now you see, you can turn that into teaching material, and then it's formative. But you can only go so far with that. If you did that every week, it would stop being formative, wouldn't it? It would just be, well, just be boring. Maybe we'll come back to that question if we have time later. So I ask, why aren't teachers at the heart of assessment? Just to bring in this point that I am not laying the blame on teachers for the kinds of things that we see in classrooms that do not look formative or do not look educational in the liberal sense. Because most teachers, when it comes to assessment, have been under-equipped, and especially under-equipped for the complex tasks of classroom assessment as opposed to test assessment. Just where they should be given the skills, they seem not to be given the skills. So, given what we know, as we're all professional educators, about how people learn, why would we expect a typical teacher who had that set of pedagogy preparation and this little set of assessment preparation, why would we expect them to be good at assessment when they graduate from those programs? I don't think we would, or we shouldn't. So, I'm thinking about teaching versus assessing, which is a conflict, and hoping to move toward a point of saying, well, there are ways we can bring them together, but it's not easy. As soon as we ask teachers to norm their students' performances, put them all on a 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 scale, by definition, has anybody heard of the Lake Wobegon effect? It's an American thing, but it's sort of spread. Lake Wobegon is an imaginary lake in the heartland of the United States where everybody is above average. Is that actually possible? Guys, is this possible? Can everybody be above average? It's like basic maths. Why not?
Half of you have got to be below average. Can't all be above average.
Because that's what an average is. So, you could all be average, statistically, perhaps. I mean, incredibly slim likelihood, but possible. But all above average, as soon as you all become above average, you're all also below average. Because it doesn't exist. So Lake Wobegon is a place where all sorts of very funny things happen on the radio once a week. But that's because in Lake Wobegon they don't norm their students. As soon as we do that, what we are being asked to do is to point the finger and say you and you and you and you and you are below average, you're failures. And for many teachers, well, many teachers don't mind, they've grown up with it, it probably doesn't bother them very much. But also, many teachers are made very uncomfortable by that notion, especially if it happens to be that these students are perhaps weak in a certain area, but they're very, very strong in something else, which happens not to be the thing that you have been told you must assess. So it's really hard to do this fairly. And it's one of the reasons why so many teachers, when pressed really hard to explain the numbers that they have awarded, say, well, he tried really hard. So they add on points for effort, which is okay if you are actually assessing everybody's effort and putting the same potential number of points in. Otherwise, it's just blatantly unfair. But teachers do that because they are being pressed not to live in the role of the teacher, the role that they actually trained for and get paid to do and chose. So this is where we come to assessment for learning. Assessment for learning gives a real role to the teacher as assessor of her own students' learning and as judge of whether each of her students has met the expected standards of the subject at the level taught. Each of her students. So in assessment for learning, everybody could be above average because there isn't one. So it's a absent concept. Or lots of different people could be above average for completely different reasons, all of them valid within the definition of whatever that subject's skill set is. In assessment for learning, the classroom teacher's concern is inherently individual, inherently pastoral. It's driven by the desire that every learner will succeed to the best of her or his ability and be rewarded for doing so. And actually, that is the philosophy. Well, I'll rephrase. I have never yet met a starting teacher who did not start with that philosophy. I've met some burned out teachers in their 27th year or whatever who no longer have that philosophy, but it's because they've lost their hope, become cynical, which is very sad for them and for their students. Assessment for learning makes it possible for teachers to use these professional skills and personal instincts to provide their own students with assessments that let them show the best they can do. And when you design the assessment to push people, one by one, or in small group, until as their teacher you realize, I can't push them anymore. They are now doing the best I've ever seen them do. Now it's time to give them the number if you must give numbers. Assessment for learning enables the differences among learners to be preserved and valued, while also providing a means of generalization and interpretation of the assessments made in classrooms. So multiple measures is essential in assessment for learning. Not just one number on one occasion, but a teacher who is constantly being a teacher, and being a teacher means also constantly and consciously measuring needs, progress, gaps between desired outcomes, where they are now, how much further they've got to go with all these students. And yes, it is difficult. Nobody who hasn't been a classroom teacher has a clue how difficult that is. And when we see bad teaching in large classrooms where the teacher is doing the same thing all the time, regardless of what's actually happening in the classroom, yes, it's bad, but nearly always they've been driven somehow into this model as a way of coping with reality. This kind of assessment is much more complex and much more skillful than being a marker on some section of the Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education. You can go to a one-day workshop on that and you'll know how to do it. You can't go to a one-day workshop on being a really good teacher, giving really good teacher assessments. And so it requires assessment literacy even more than formal tests do. In fact, I know quite a few people, retired people, such as the wives of former British Council officers, who make their retirement money out of test marking, who've never been trained as teachers, but happen to be native speakers of English, and they did a one-day workshop. They're probably very good at it, because the skills that they need to make those judgments are not at all related to understanding what a learner needs. They're just different. Okay, so over the last 15 years, I have understood more and more that many people have trouble with abstract concepts like assessment for learning. You can't bottle it and put it in a 1-hour workshop or a 1-hour rant by a visiting professor. All I could hope for is that you'd say, well, half the time I thought she was talking a load of rubbish, but it did sound kind of, I don't know, stimulating. I'll just go and look it up. I'll just go and Google it or Wikipedia it or whatever. So if I could make you do that, I would feel it wasn't a complete loss. Because it's an abstract concept, and I can't explain it to you. Now, I can explain to you some things where it's not happening. But in fact, when Chris Davison and I were working on a project at Hong Kong U, and we tried to collect videos showing assessment for learning, it was incredibly difficult because, you know what? Videos in teacher workshops can't be more than about 5 minutes long. All the really good assessment for learning sessions that we recorded were at least half an hour long and required a series of 4 or 5 of them with the same teacher and the same person to see how learning was progressing. Often it proceeds in infinitesimal steps, but it does proceed. So instead of talking about that vague stuff, let's think for a minute of assessment outcomes as information. When we do classroom assessment and when we do large-scale assessment, we get information, somewhat different information, but we have information. Once we have information, we can think about who gets that information and what they do with it. And really, since teachers don't very much need it themselves, because since they spend all these hours with their students, they pretty much do know which students have got which kinds of needs and which students are, you know, above the level of the course and are very, very bored. The people who need the information the most are the people who are outside the classroom to make other kinds of decisions. And I'm thinking now specifically of parents. I'm leaving aside all those large-scale stakeholders that I talked about on Tuesday and just thinking about parents. Studies of parents, including studies that Chris Davison and I did all those years ago, show that parents would like more information about the tests their children take, including opportunities to view the test, access to materials that would help them understand the test and so help their child get ready for the test, and ways to understand how to judge the test. People almost never think about parents judging the test. The testers judge the kids, but these days I seem to be around lots and lots of people with primary school age children at the moment. They spend so much of their time telling stories about what their kids are being asked to do and whether they consider that's reasonable, and shall I go up to the school and ask, you know, for more information about so-and-so. And this is in UK, where generally a lot of people do feel quite empowered to go to the school and say, why are you giving this sort of work or this sort of assessment to my child? There are plenty of places in the world where parents wouldn't go because they don't feel empowered. They wouldn't feel welcome. Which reminds me, I did bring a scrap of paper from today's South China Morning Post letters section, which just happens to be relevant. The heading of this letter is Parents Need to Ease Pressure on Students. This is the flip side of what I was just saying. The tragedy of more student suicides should be of concern to the whole of society, as our young people are our future pillars. Many parents work such long hours that after a long day in the office, they do not have any time to spare for their children. It's important they try to develop a strong bond with their sons and daughters. No matter how difficult it is, they should try and find time to talk to them. Having a relationship where there is mutual respect is extremely important. They must also not try to compare students today with previous generations, as times have changed. I've been around long enough to have seen multiple generations change, and it's always the same. Things are not like they used to be. Parents must not put too much pressure on their children academically and have expectations that are too high. Each student has different strengths and weaknesses, and this has to be understood by parents. I don't think you'd ever get this letter in Britain. I think parents in Britain are much more, it's not fair what the schools are doing to the children. It's not fair what the parents are failing to do with the children. So it's something not Hong Kong unique, but very different from other countries. If parents haven't got the time for their children, that's a tragedy. But saying, well, don't push them isn't the answer, because in this society, people push their children. It won't change the whole of society. What you can do is give parents assessment literacy, so they know when to worry, when to ask questions, who to ask questions of, and how to understand the answers. So, continuing with this notion of assessment as information, if the information is not comprehensible, it is of no use, and very often the assessment information which parents receive is incomprehensible to them, therefore it's no use to them. When parents can use assessment information to help their child, it is a sign of assessment for learning in practice, because it means that people along the way have put work into making it accessible to parents, making it comprehensible, making it clear, opening up all the secrets which are so often submerge the knowledge of the tests. So when is assessment for learning? When is assessment for learning? That is when the assessment process preserves the information about what learners can do and enjoy all the way through the system. So let's assume that in the classroom, good assessment activities are happening. We do know that very often all of that disappears by the time it goes onto a report card that goes home, and even more of it disappears by the time it's aggregated and they put one school's performance against another school's performance, and it just becomes I was going to say dehumanized, but there should be a word, de-childized, right? Taking the child out of the information. So the information should be there and should be reported to the parents, even if, as is often the case, what goes to school principals, larger scale system administrators, maybe national reviews, and also maybe reporting to, let's say, a higher education institution that people want to go to. Okay, so that information might need to be simplified, but it doesn't have to be simplified to go to the parents. And I would say it shouldn't be, because then what that is doing is taking power away from the parents. You remove knowledge, you remove power. The bigger the system reported to, and so many studies have shown this, the bigger the system, the likelier it is that information gets lost. And that is what David Carlis called double duty. So, a way forward, I think there are two ways forward. The first one is that we can and must develop serious professional quality courses and opportunities in assessment suitable for various kinds of teachers. And people are now starting to do that. There are a number of decent initiatives. Still not enough, but they're happening around the world. So there is some optimism in that area. But also, we must shape or reshape the assessments to make the very most of the knowledge and skills of teachers. So both of these things working together enable the teachers to do things better and make assessments that also allow them to do things better. And while we're doing it, since we're going to be doing all these great changes, we should be capitalizing on research in testing and assessment, especially in terms of digital forms of assessment, which again is a huge explosion at the moment. And even I am now realizing that we can't hold back those waters any longer. So what's going on in Hong Kong? And I've sort of run out of time, but we'll see. We can stop this if you wish me to stop this. The Hong Kong scene. During 7 years working on school-based assessment, I found out how mistrustful many Hong Kong parents are of change, especially changing tests. Even tests they hated, they didn't want changed because they knew all its nastiness, and they'd figured out ways to overcome the nastiness of it. Parents are highly acculturated to the rigid forms of testing, which were all Britain's fault in the first place, multiplied by the Confucian heritage, so we created quite a mess between us. So rather than pushing for changes in assessment for test reform, many parents spend a great amount of time, effort, money, ensuring that their own child is fully prepared for the existing tests. Sometimes a huge amount of money. I'm thinking of a case that I'm personally connected to, which is absolutely ridiculous amounts of money. Studies have shown that this is going on in other Confucian heritage cultures like Korea and Japan and mainland China. Add to that that parents and many teachers have a very naive view of what fairness means in a test. I'd love to talk for an hour about what fairness means, but I guess I won't do that. But I will say that if people have that naive view, that's also an issue of lack of assessment literacy. The issues here are as much socio-political as educational. Education is power, knowledge is power, and everybody wants those advantages for their own children. When there's not enough of any advantage in a society for everybody to have an equal share of it, there will be competition. Government has worked hard to liberalise the education system, but at the same time, it still pressures young people with great competition for educational opportunities. And this is the same conflict, but from a different point of view. Many of the principles of assessment for learning, as I briefly laid them out, don't fit at all well in a competition-rich but resource-poor context, the way Hong Kong always seems to be. And so now I come to the pointy end of the story here. and it's about the TSA. So, I'm told that the assessment cycle in Hong Kong schools often ends at the point of collection and analysis of data and doesn't translate into pedagogic decisions. So, what's wrong here? Who collects the data? In TSA, who collects the data? Who?
Government.
Really? You mean they send a government officer into your school? Do they?
What do you mean?
Well, I don't know who collects the data. How does information arrive to government?
Through the TSA assessment.
Doesn't somebody have to do something? Does the TSA somehow go into people's brains and suck out their
Oh,
knowledge?
no, it's administered by the
Yeah, where?
schools.
Yeah. I suspect that there are a certain number of teachers that have a certain role. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, so often, maybe less so in TSA, I don't know. But in many systems, all the raw data is collected in schools by teachers. During class time or on the weekends being paid overtime or on the weekends not being paid overtime in some countries. Who analyses the data? Is it the teachers? No. What is actually analysed? Well, if it's a speaking performance, is that analysed? No, I don't think so. Somebody puts a number on, and all the numbers get added together, and then that is what's analysed. Yeah? So there are performances, and somebody has got those performances, but that isn't what usually gets analysed. Who benefits from the information? Is it the teachers? Is it the parents? Is it the children? These are real questions because I don't know TSA.
That's the only thing they do, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking because
I believe they overstaffed.
the only things I know is what I was told, and now I've gone and looked up TSA, so I know a teeny tiny bit, and I'm just about to look at it. So I found the TSA HKEAA leaflet in English, and there's the web address. These slides will be available, won't they, at some stage? So you could look this up, but it's easy to find on the Exam Authority website. I found it in 2 minutes. So you probably can't read this. These 2 slides are the 2-page leaflet. So I'll read you the first part. How should schools treat the TSA data? So this leaflet, by the sound of it, is addressed to schools, not to parents or children, and not to government. Some other paperwork, I guess. Schools should handle the assessment data in a positive and professional manner. Now, I literally knew nothing about TSA until talking to someone in Hong Kong because this question had arisen. I only looked at this piece of paper yesterday. And that is a simple sentence. But the first thought that popped into my head when I read that sentence was, there's a very funny story behind this sentence. It's like somebody somewhere hasn't handled something in a professional manner. I have no idea what the thing was that wasn't handled in a professional manner. Truthfully, I have no idea. But it's being a slight, well, an interest in discourse analysis. I look at this and I go, uh-oh, what's the story? Let's unpack it. Maybe I'll be told at some point. But it does seem a little peculiar. So then there's thousands of things here, but because of the time, I will go to the next page, which struck me because the yellow box says, what is assessment for learning? And well, that's just exactly what I'm going to be talking about. So, of course, I had to read it. And just so that you can see what it actually says, what is assessment for learning? Assessment is used to collect evidence of student learning. The title and that statement do not fit together, because that is not what assessment for learning is. So it's complete, two things that have missed each other on their journey. Whoever wrote that didn't know what assessment for learning is, which would not have mattered at all if they hadn't used that specific term. Because everything that I read on just these 2 pages make it clear that what is happening is not assessment for learning. Therefore, let's not call a pig a swan. If it's ugly, let's just call it ugly. But what it means is, by the way, there's a group of people somewhere who they are, I haven't got a clue, who need assessment literacy. If they're going to write material like this, then they need to understand their own area. And so I can understand if there is a tension between stakeholder groups, people who, teachers versus parents, or teachers versus government, or parents versus government, or whomever, because these two messages are completely mixed up and confusing. So now, what is the difference between formative and summative assessment? I use those two terms because I'm fairly sure they're on all the single assessment courses that people will have taken. Maybe not. Okay, nobody's going to stick their necks out because I'm being much too fierce. Okay. Are you a little louder? So, formative, that's a clue, isn't it? We form something, we shape something. We work with the material. So, assessment for learning is within the group of behaviours called formative assessment. But it's true really of all formative assessment that its first priority is to serve the purpose of promoting students' learning. Its first priority. Maybe not every priority, but first priority. Promote student learning. And the reference there is this book it's a very thin book, but it's a lovely book, really easy and a delight to read and full of teachers' voices and experiences. What needs to be realized, what the people who made that leaflet need to realize, is that collecting evidence and promoting learning are not synonyms. And if you think they're synonyms, and you design a curriculum or a test on the basis that they're synonyms, you're going to be in some trouble. I'm going to skip over those. I knew I would not have time. In conclusion, I believe that through serious efforts to bring assessment literacy to every teacher, and by making curriculum and assessment developers more aware of forms of learning-oriented assessment, we can bring in positive change. I know I've sounded very gloomy some of the time in this talk, but I'm not that gloomy. There are some good signs of positive change in the field of assessment. Language assessment is my own area, and there are good signs in my field, but more generally, education as a whole. They're slow to spread precisely because they're complicated, which is why we need the assessment literacy there. I believe that language assessment literacy is as important as assessment literacy in any other disciplinary area. Just because it's language, it has got certain specific things that are opportunities for assessment literacy in language education, but fundamentally it's the same set of issues as maths education, biology education, history education, and so on. And then I will end with the same set of references which I gave on Tuesday, because they are about assessment literacy. They are all available online, and they are all, I find, enjoyable, quite simple. Some of them are very detailed, but each step of them is quite simple. So they're worth looking at when you get hold of a copy of the set of slides. And I thank you very much indeed for putting up with me for such a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hamp-Lyons. It is indeed a very inspiring and interactive talk. I believe that you may have a lot of questions for Professor Hamp-Lyons. Any questions? Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm Joy from CUHK, MPhil in Applied English Linguistics. And before I came to CUHK, I served as a secondary school English teacher in mainland China. So I had frontline experience in English language teaching. Well, perhaps it's not a question, but a comment with regard to my teaching experience. Well, just now you emphasized assessment literacy, which I quite agree with. Another point that I would like to highlight is that, well, I really hope that teachers can be empowered. I mean, as teachers, I and my colleagues used to be assessed by the school, by the principal, and by the government, by the education bureau, and how we were assessed were just based on students' grades. So actually, we are, to a great extent, we were forced to teach to the test. Ideally, we really hope to teach in a communicative way, but the reality just forced us to teach to the test, and due to the washback effects. So that's my observation. Thank you.
You're welcome. I have heard this a lot, and I know that it's true. Sad to say, that sort of thing is gradually creeping in Britain, which, we think of it as having been from the past. Actually, teachers used to get paid according to the results of their students. And we thought we left that behind 100 and something years ago, but noises are being made about introducing that. The impact of that on the teachers is terrible, but even worse is the impact on the learners. I don't have any good ideas, but I know you didn't expect.
So the point that I want to emphasize the empowerment for teachers, especially frontline teachers.
Yes. If we knew how to do that, I mean, I'm sure there are lots of people in China who know that's necessary, but they can't do it.
But I think the process is quite complicated. It can involve a large-scale reform, and I think
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, ideas, and I was wondering, it looks like we can't really escape from the TSA now. We have to take it again. And what's your suggestion about how we could better use of those data so we can, so it's not so much of a torture for us?
Well, you heard me say that I know very little about the TSA, and one thing I don't know at all is what data do teachers get at the moment. I mean, I know where the data starts out in the classroom, but what do you get
very
back?
detailed analysis of each question, like how many
Percentage of students choosing A, B, C, and D.
Yeah, and they compare that percentage with the average of Hong Kong overall
Okay.
students.
So do you get that per student? Do you get it for your class?
The grade, the whole grade, the P3, like 80% of students chose A.
For your class?
No, for the whole.
But really, there's not anything you can do with it, is there?
We compare to the region to other schools. So it's
So what you can say is, oh, my kids, our kids, are doing worse than those kids, or better than those kids. Is this useful?
It's for their benefit rather than for the teachers or the students' benefit.
And this is what I said on that one slide. The larger the authority which is calling for the information, the less likely it is that when the information, if the information flows back to you, you'll recognise it. And it seems like this is a case where something comes back to you. It might be a deluge of information, but it's not information that you can use because it's not about your school or your class or even your school year. Certainly not about any kid in your own classroom. For helping kids in classrooms, it is and will be the responsibility of the individual teacher. All those numbers won't change that.
It's meant to not have any stakes on the students, that's the whole point. And so students are not shouldn't be under any pressure. Teachers shouldn't be under any pressure by it, because it has no stakes for them.
Then why do people object? I have heard that
I
some
don't
people
object to it,
reject
but
it.
teachers object to it.
Yeah,
Parents
right.
object
I
to it.
assumed you wouldn't because you're not a stakeholder, are you?
I'm not a stakeholder.
No, right, so. Yes.
But neither are teachers supposedly, and neither is
may I add another point of view on the same subject? I'm a secondary school teacher. Most of my students, they are weaker. They are born in mainland or they're non-Chinese. So for the TSA for Form 3, they don't feel the pressure because they know that the marks the performance they do would not evaluate themselves. It's not longitudinal tracking. It's not tracking them. So they would take the TSA exam after the final exam, the third exam, the 2-3 days. They know that the result will not. The scores that the school have would not be hold against them or judge them. So at the same time, I feel good that they don't feel the pressure. They do it as an exercise, actually. So when I hear the news about the pressure about TSA, it's mostly from the primary schools. For the Form 3 students, especially my students, they see it through. I mean, it won't affect me. Yeah.
But what I'm not understanding in what you're saying there is, if there's no stakes for these people, why are they doing it?
I think the schools themselves, I'm not clear on this, but I think the schools themselves are held somewhat accountable for the results of the students, and
they're not supposed to be, but
unofficially so.
We are funded by the Education Bureau, so it's sort of like we get money from the Education Bureau. We have to do whatever the Education Bureau asks me to do. They need information. We have to provide information.
But you see, what I'm hearing is confusion among you.
Yes and no.
There
test is probably a reasonable test, but the way it's used has led to schools ultimately around the place insisting their students are trained more and more and more to do better.
Is it the way it's used or the way some people have
used the data.
rumour that it might be used?
It's rumours and it's mistrust.
Yeah. So ultimately, the school children at primary age are being given massive amounts of drilling homework, and it's dominating their lives.
That's not rumour, it's either true or not true.
And
Is it true?
That is true.
Oh, it's not.
a year and something ago.
It's drilling anyway.
Yeah, a year and
One
something.
way or another, without TSA will be another one.
Well, drilling
Yeah.
is wrong.
So a year and something ago, parents around the territory came together and protested. It was totally removed as a compulsory exam for a year. They've just announced it's coming back, slightly adjusted tasks, and that I think is the
Why did the parents?
because of the pressure on their children.
Who had given them the pressure?
This is where someone
Who's
in
pressing the children if there's no stakes? This is incomprehensible.
The teachers are being pressed from above.
But there's no stakes.
Exactly.
So who is pressing from the moral principle?
Everyone, yeah, excuse me. So I'm actually looking at a bigger picture, like wider picture. So yeah. So my question is like, so how can we change the situation now? And maybe there's nothing wrong. Maybe we are just having different point of view. So you know, I'm teaching like adult students. So I start to adult, you know, yeah, like older than me, basically. Yeah, I teach here, so yeah, I'm a senator here as well. So, right. So yeah, basically, I start to teach the English grammar. So I start to find out with them that I think we shouldn't put so much time on TSA because actually the question type of TSA is very similar to all other question types of normal exam in the school, okay, in the school base, okay? So we should actually look into the normal exam that we're giving to the students. This has nothing really to do with, you know, assessment for learning, in my perspective, as, you know, they are like training P2 students to see, if you see yesterday, so remember that you need to put in past tense. However, in this case, you can put in past perfect, or even present perfect as well. It depends on the context. Exactly. When you see now in the sentence, then you must put in present continuous tense. But however, like, yeah. My point is like, in my opinion, that is definitely bad because they are not learning actually how to use the language to communicate. They're learning how to finish the examination. Who's causing? Oh yeah, good. So come back to the point I taught to my students. Those are adults. So I taught to them like, it's not really a good way to follow your school. Then they will just tell me that, oh, but you know, teacher, we have no other choices as my kids need to go through all these exams in order to have achieve a greater, you know, score in order to get into a better secondary school. And after a better secondary school, so because of these texts, then they can get into a better university. Yeah, that is why I just say that do not just focus on TSA. If we really want to have a better assessment for learning, we're wasting time to only focus on TSA. Yeah.
To me, what I am being told here is very, very strange indeed, because it seems like just this small group of people in this room don't have the same, if there are any facts, don't have the same facts. And there are multiple points of view on this, and the facts are all exactly the same, then we could sit down together and have, you know, a sensible debate. Because after all, we are not discussing, you know, does God exist, where some people will never change their mind. Well, most people will never change their mind, so you can't have a debate. But if this is a real debate about something concrete in education, and some people have got different facts than others, already that means be a conclusion that will satisfy anybody, maybe. It's probably a good time to stop.
Yes. So, actually, I believe once we talk about TSA, it will last forever until we really sit down and have a debate. I'm very sorry because time is running short. We have to come to the end of this seminar. To thank Professor Hamp-Lyons, Dr. Zhang, our dean, would like to present a souvenir to her. It is something memorable, a photo frame with a photo we took on after Tuesday's seminar. We hope that you would like it.
Well, so do I.
Yes, thank you, Liz. Liz has been here for 1 week. This is the second seminar she gave. And now usually people go to seminar, we would, send something like this. And I do receive a lot of this downstairs. And all this plastic, I try to make sure it is more environmental friendly. And hence, what we have come up is to try to find a way which Liz would not throw this away. by putting in your photo in your first seminar. So we think this is something that you would bring back home. Hope this is not too heavy. Something you can bring back home and feel that you did contribute to our little discussion of assessment issue. The whole debate about TSA is in fact how to make sense of something, this assessment thing that's happening in our life. And by the way, my daughter's in her primary schools. The school never did any drilling. We simply ignore TSA. This is a standard aided school in Hong Kong. And TSA paper, by the way, you can always go to HKEA website. Is free for download. No need to buy, other, exercises books from the supplementary exercises because it's free. And government actually sends you, all these free papers. I can send you the link. So you can download, have a look, and see what. And the actual paper is over there. So no need to buy any supplementary exercises from any shops whatsoever. And but this is an interesting debate. That's why I brought this up in our conversation. And I think I told you, people bound to raise this issue of TSA. And so thank you for your talk, Liz. And I hope this week has been a memorable week for us. And I hope it will also be a memorable week for you. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
In fact, we will be sending you a link with all the photos we take, including those here, for you to choose and put it here.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Lyons. Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Zhang.